Yo, what is going on, everybody? Thank you so much for clicking on this video. Today we are getting into our week 9 rankings of the wide receivers. I have already done my top 30 running backs, so if you haven't seen that, make sure to go check it out on the channel. We also do have bye weeks this week, so we're gonna have some people out. We got the Niners on bye, the Jaguars on bye, the Broncos on bye, and the Lions on bye. So we're not gonna have any Debo, no Ayuk, no Amon-Ra, no Ridley, Kirk, Zay Jones, Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, and there are a couple injuries we just want to monitor. So DeAndre Hopkins a little banged up, should probably be fine, but I just want to watch it since he's on Thursday Night Football. Also, Drake London has a little hamstring or groin injury since Taylor Heineke is starting. I am pretty excited about playing him, but we got to watch and make sure he actually does play. Besides that, nothing too major going on, so let's just get into these rankings. All right, first up, so I think nobody's surprised, we are going to have Tyreek Hill here. He is going up against the Kansas City Chiefs, which has been a pretty tough defense recently, but it's Tyreek Hill, and this offense is unbelievable. I'm not worried about it whatsoever. It is going to be in Germany, so it could be a little bit interesting, but they did fly there on like Monday or Tuesday. I'm not really too worried about it. It's Tyreek Hill. Similar to this next guy I'm going to have in my wide receiver too, it's going to be A.J. Brown. He has a pretty tough matchup against Dallas defense this week, which has given up the 7th least points to wide receivers over the past month, so it's a hard defense to play against for wide receivers, but I'm not worried about it whatsoever for A.J. Brown. He's gone 125 or more receiving yards in the last like 5 or 6 games, which is an NFL record, and I don't really see any reason why I would stop now. And then the last guy in this tier I'm going to have is going to be Jamar Chase going up against the Buffalo Bills. They've given up the 23rd least amount of points to wide receivers on the year, so one of the easier matchups, and Jamar Chase is one of the best wide receivers in the league, and Joe Burrow seems to be back to his old self. So in a really good matchup with these elite guys, I'm going to feel very confident having him as a top 3 option this week. And then to start off my next tier, more elite guys that I'm going to have here is going to be Stephon Diggs first, and then I should just mention the other guy that's in this tier is going to be CeeDee Lamb. There could very easily be in tier 1, but I just wanted to split them up a little bit. CeeDee Lamb had his best performance of his career last week, and going up against Philadelphia Eagles this week, who have given up the most points to wide receivers over the past month, should be another great game for him. Same thing with Diggs. I mean, he is just automatic every single week, going like 10 for 100, and they're playing the Cincinnati Bengals, obviously, so should be a really good matchup for him as well. Honestly, every single guy here besides A.J. Brown has a really good matchup. All 5 of these guys I feel very, very confident about and should all be studs this week. Now moving on to tier 3, where we get a little bit more questions. We're going to have Cooper Kupp to start it off. He had a pretty disappointing week, and honestly the entire team did. Honestly, the past 2 weeks he hasn't been that good. I think the biggest thing though for him is if Matthew Stafford will play or not, because if Matthew Stafford doesn't play, you're going to move Kupp way down the rankings. He still probably is going to be in your lineup because he's going to get force-fed a ton of targets, but Stafford just makes a total difference for this offense and all the receiving options in it. He is considered day-to-day right now, so it sounds like he should play, but it's definitely something you're going to want to watch. And then after him, we have Keenan Allen, who has been also really good for fantasy this year. They are just playing the Jets this week, which has given up the least points to wide receivers on the year, so it's a really hard matchup. Keenan Allen normally is somebody who's going to overcome that, but it is something that you at least want to take notice of, and the reason why he's not in that top 2 tier for me. After Keenan, we're going to have Adam Thielen here. He has been just unbelievable. Got 11 targets again last week. He's been super solid and consistent for fantasy, and he does have a really hard matchup this week. And his matchup this week against the Colts, they've actually given up the 6th least points to wide receivers over the past month, but he's just getting peppered with so many targets that he's going to be fine no matter what. And on the year, the Colts haven't been very good, so not exactly sure where the truth lies, but Thielen's somebody that I'm not going to be worried about because his volume is so insane. After him, we're going to have Jalen Waddle here. Obviously the same matchup as Tyreek Hill, so going up against the Kansas City Chiefs. Waddle's been really, really good over the past month, maybe 3 games or so. I think he's really found his stride with his team this year, and I think that is only going to continue. Obviously, Hill's still going to be the clear number 1 receiver here, but Waddle is so good, and they pass the ball so much that they're both going to be very, very valuable for fantasy. And even though it is a hard matchup, it should be a really high-scoring game, and they're both going to have opportunities to score. And then the last guy in this tier, it could be a little bit spicy, I don't know, but it's going to be Devontae Adams. I know he has been really, really bad over the past couple of weeks, but I don't really think that it's his fault. I mean, he did drop 1 ball last week and then dropped a touchdown a couple of weeks ago, but most of them he is like wide open and he's just getting missed on opportunities. And now they just fired their head coach, their offensive coordinator, their GM. They benched Jimmy G, so Aiden O'Connell is going to be starting. And honestly, I think this is going to be good for Devontae Adams. The 1 week we saw Aiden O'Connell start Davante Adams got 13 targets. And so I think that is going to be a similar thing going on here. I honestly think that Jakobi Meyers is the big loser here. I have a feeling that he's just going to pepper Davante and Josh Jacobs with targets. The 1 week he did start, Jakobi Meyers did basically nothing. So I don't know if that's exactly what's going to happen, but my assumption is going to be hyper focused on Davante Adams and Josh Jacobs. So it should be good for them for fantasy. And that's a big reason why I think Davante is going to have a really good week this week. And I think he's going to bounce back. And it's a really good matchup against the New York Giants. So everything for me personally lines up where I think Davante Adams should have a bounce back week, but I totally understand if you're worried about that. All right, onto my tier 4 of guys. We're gonna have Mike Evans to start it off. They're going up against the Houston Texans, which has been pretty middle of the road over the past month against wide receivers. And Mike Evans honestly was not doing good at all last week until the very end of the game when he had a massive touchdown. And I mean, that's kind of what, not the fact that he has been inconsistent throughout the game, but those big touchdowns we've seen a lot this year. You're gonna have the opportunity every single time, and it seems like he's still the clear wide receiver 1 in this offense. And so I think that he's always going to be around a fringe top 15 guy. And with all the bye weeks this week, I think that he's a low end wide receiver 1. After Mike, we're going to have Devonta Smith, who we really saw a bounce back game this past week. Really nice to see. Jalen Hurts looked really good. Devonta Smith made some great catches. AJ Brown still had a great game. So seeing both of them produce was awesome to see because we hadn't seen that a ton this year. And like I talked about with AJ Brown, it is a tough matchup this week against Dallas, but something that they can definitely both overcome. And I'm really not too worried about it affecting them too much. And then the last guy in this tier I'm going to have is going to be Chris Olave. He has been getting targeted a ton, one of the actual target leaders on the year this year, but it doesn't quite come through for fantasy, and that's mostly just due to touchdowns. And I think that that is something that is going to be coming, especially with how many targets he's getting. And it seemed like last week they really started to figure out some stuff on the offense, and this week they get to play the Chicago Bears, so everything just lines up for this team to continue to keep building on the offense and keep producing. I really hope that Chris Olave and Derek Carr figure it out, because there does seem to be something kind of weird with that connection right now, but he's so talented and he's getting targeted a ton. I think you're going to want to keep playing him because the better performances are coming. And to start off tier 5, I'm going to have Puka Nacua here. This is obviously contingent on the fact that Matthew Stafford should be starting. I think Puka is probably the guy that takes a way bigger hit if Matthew Stafford isn't starting, because his volume is not at all guaranteed with other people. But as long as Stafford is starting, you're going to want to keep playing Puka. After Puka, we will have Garrett Wilson here, who had a really good week last week, went 7 for 100. No touchdowns, but still had a really good week. Had one really big catch, honestly, to help win the game, that with like a 50-yard reception and really saved his day. But he can do that every single week. It's really just about Zach Wilson. And this week they're playing the Los Angeles Chargers, which is obviously, we know, not a good defense. So it should be a spot where they can just feed him targets. And it's definitely one of the best ways for them to win, is just to feed Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall. And so I think that Garrett Wilson would kind of be that low-end wide receiver 2, mid wide receiver 2 every week. And just because he is so talented, and I'm going to be playing him in the leagues that I have him, but he also is somebody who you're going to kind of temper expectations for just because Zach Wilson is throwing the ball. And the last guy in this tier is going to be DK Metcalf. They have a really hard matchup this week against the Baltimore Ravens, who have given up the 4th least points to wide receivers over the past month. But DK, obviously a physical freak who can overcome stuff. He hasn't quite been what we expected so far this year. I think honestly a lot of it is because of Geno Smith. He hasn't quite seen the same. Jackson Smith and Jigba is also getting more involved. So some of that volume and efficiency with the offense has definitely been taken away from DK, but he's still just so physical and so gifted that you're going to want to play him because he gets targeted in the red zone so much and can make plays any single time that he gets the ball targeted. And he can make insane plays anytime the ball's thrown his way. So you're always going to want to give him that chance, but definitely has been a little bit disappointing. And to start off tier 6, this is where a lot more question marks. I mean, definitely some question marks in the last guys, but these tiers are separated by a lot less, I think. So at tier 6 started off, I'm going to have Nico Collins first. He didn't have a great week this past week, but still was a clear lead target in this offense. And now this week they're playing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who have given up the 2nd most points to fantasy wide receivers on the past month. And so I think that better days are coming for him. I think this offense will start to figure it out more because they have been in a little bit slump after the beginning of the season, but I'm not really too worried about it. It should be a good matchup and a bounce back game for everyone. And after Nico Collins, I'm going to have T. Higgins here. This is really just because he's healthy. This offense has been clicking. Joe Burrow has been figuring it out. And I think that better days are coming for everybody in this offense. They have been over the past couple weeks. Like I talked about with Jamar Chase, they're playing the Buffalo Bills this week, which is a pretty good matchup for wide receivers. And people like T. Higgins, when he's healthy and ready to go, he can score and have great games any single time. And in a good matchup. Definitely excited to play him this week. I'm just hoping we can start to see some of the consistency we've had over the past couple of years come back. All right, next up, we're going to have Michael Pittman here. He had like 13 targets this past week, really showed out. Now they're getting a matchup against the Carolina Panthers, which is really good for wide receivers. So it should be another good week for him. Gardner Minshew has been feeding him the ball. I don't really see a reason why that would stop now. But I mean, we did see him get like 2 targets a couple weeks ago, so that could happen, but I don't really see what reason why it should. All right, next up, we're going to have Zay Flowers here. He has a pretty tough matchup this week going up against the Seattle Seahawks. They've given up the 5th least amount of points to wide receivers over the past month, so it is a pretty tough matchup, like I said. But he is someone who has been getting pretty consistent volume, and he's a young, explosive rookie, so that's nice to see. He hasn't been super productive with that volume yet. Obviously, it's happened some weeks, but it hasn't been very consistent. So I don't know if this is quite the week that he is going to make that happen, but it's definitely a possibility just with how explosive he is and how many opportunities he's getting. So I have him ranked here, but there definitely is a little bit of worry just with how consistent he's been and this tough matchup. After him is going to be Terry McLaurin, who has been really good over the past couple of weeks. Now it seems like Curtis Samuel's hurt, and their defense isn't as good, getting rid of Chase Young and Montez Sweat. And the reason that matters is because if their defense isn't as good, they'll be giving up more points, meaning they have to throw the ball more, which means more production for the wide receivers like Terry McLaurin and hopefully Jahan Dotson, because we saw it for the first time for him last week. But Terry has been really good. Sam Howell has been good. And playing the New England Patriots this week, who have given up the 24th least amount of points to wide receivers on the year, so a pretty good matchup for wide receivers. It should be a good week for Terry in this offense. After him, we have DeAndre Hopkins playing on Thursday night. Obviously, we saw an unbelievable game from him last week. He had 3 touchdowns on 4 receptions. We're not going to be expecting that every single week with Will Levis, but we definitely got an idea that Will Levis isn't scared to throw the ball, isn't scared to throw the ball to DeAndre Hopkins in one-on-one coverage. Pretty accurate with it. And so I think overall, this is definitely a massive upgrade for DeAndre Hopkins and this offense. It'll be nice to see what it actually looks like when teams have time to game plan for it and when he's facing a guy like TJ Watt. So I think Thursday will be very helpful to see what we really got on our hands. It isn't a ton of time to really prep and watch the film, but it still will be a better idea than what we saw this past week. DeAndre Hopkins also is a little bit banged up, but it's pretty normal for him to not practice, so I'm not really too worried about it, but we'll want to monitor that, but I am pretty excited to see what we got here. And then the last guy in this tier I'm going to have is going to be DJ Moore. Last week was weird for him because he honestly had a pretty good first half, and then they just didn't throw him the ball in the second half. He only had 1 target, and Justin Fields isn't going to be back. It's still going to be Tyson Bagent, and they have a really tough matchup against New Orleans Saints this week. So overall, I'm not really too excited for it, but I think that he'll get more targets than he did last week, and he's a really explosive wide receiver who can make something out of nothing at any time. So you're probably going to be playing him, but I definitely have my expectations tempered for him this week. And then to start off my last tier, I'm going to have Gabe Davis up first. He's had some struggles, but that's pretty normal for him. He's going to have up and down weeks. That's just the nature of who he is. But we saw 2 weeks ago his best performance of the year. But then last week they played the Jets. He didn't have a good game, but they have the best defense against wide receivers on the year. So I'm not really too worried about that. And it's also the nature of him, like I mentioned. So he's going to have bad games. He's going to have good games. You're always just hoping it's going to be one of those good games when you put in your lineup. And that's why he's never ranked like super high, but he's normally ranked because there's always a point where you're going to want to take that risk. And they do have a pretty good matchup this week against Cincinnati where they're going to want to show out with everything that happened last year. So I think this could be one of those good weeks for him, but that's definitely never a guarantee. And then after him, I'm going to have the 2 Steelers wide receivers also playing on Thursday night. The offense definitely looks a lot better with DeAndre Johnson back in the lineup. They're just able to move the ball more, but George Pickens is the much more explosive guy and using the red zone more. He only got 1 reception last week, which was a travesty, but it turned into a touchdown, so that is nice to kind of save his day, but you got to give him more opportunity there. Tennessee has been kind of middle of the road over the past month against the wide receivers. Hopefully we can kind of see what we saw in the beginning of the year where they were really bad and both these guys can show out. Then after him, I'm going to have Jacoby Myers. I kind of talked about him with Devontae Adams. He's been really good this year, but without Jimmy G and with Aiden O'Connell starting, I'm very worried about him not doing as good. And I think that this week we'll get a good idea because they do have a pretty friendly matchup against New York Giants. So I'm going to want to see how he turns out in this performance, but my initial reaction to these moves is that Jacoby Myers takes the biggest hit on the fantasy side. And then after him, I'm going to have Amari Cooper. He's obviously this low because of the quarterback situation there right now. We don't know at all who's going to be playing, whether it's going to be Deshaun Watson, PJ Walker, DTR. Could really be any of those guys, and that's going to extremely vary where he'll be ranked. So if it is Deshaun Watson or even PJ Walker, he'll move up, but right now we just don't know, so I'm very scared of it. But they do have a really good matchup against the Arizona Cardinals this week, so if it's one of the 2 guys, I'll be much more we're excited to play him and definitely will want to have him in my lineup. And after him, I'll have Chris Godwin, who has started to come on a little bit more these past couple of weeks. Mike Evans, like I talked about, still the clear wide receiver 1 here, but Chris Godwin is getting a lot of volume and doing pretty well with it. He had his first touchdown of the year this past week, almost had a second Hail Mary one. So we're starting to see Godwin turn it on, and hopefully that just continues. But they do have a kind of middle of the road, little difficult matchup with Houston. It'll be interesting to see because they are kind of middle of the pack against it. So I am kind of curious to see how this goes because they can kind of go anywhere with it. And I think it'll be a lot of a neutral game script. So it'll be a good idea to see what they really want to do with this offense. And then last guy in this top 30 I'm going to have is going to be Rashee Rice. He's looked really good. Definitely like the best wide receiver in this offense right now. And playing the Miami Dolphins, you kind of want to take advantage of that. And it's going to be a really high scoring game. I think Rashee Rice definitely has a chance to have a good week. But in this offense, it can be definitely inconsistent. But I think Patrick Mahomes is just going to be pissed after last week and want to come out just guns blazing. And I think that Rashee Rice can definitely be a beneficiary of that. Now here's my top 30, but there are obviously some guys outside of it that I definitely want to mention because there's so many good options at wide receiver. So obviously we're going to have Drake London, like I talked about. He's just kind of hurt right now, so that's why he's not ranked here. It's a little bit surprising injury, so I'm a little bit worried about it. I'll be monitoring that situation as the week goes on. So if we get more information, just leave your questions down below and I can get back to you on that. Josh Downs has also produced a lot recently, so he's somebody you can definitely put into your lineup. Tyler Lockett as well. Hollywood Brown, same situation. And even with what we saw last week, you can take your shot on Jahan Dotson if you really want to. Obviously, it's very scary. I want to see it for a little bit longer than just 1 week, but it was nice to see that. We know he has that talent. We just got to see it more consistently. But yeah, here's my top 30 wide receivers heading into week 9. Let me know if you guys have any questions about it. Like I said, any questions about start sits, just leave them down below in the comments. Also drop a like on the video while you're at it. It really helps me out a ton. And subscribe to the channel. Another thing that really helps me out. Top 15 quarterback and tight end should be out pretty soon after this. So make sure you check that out and I'll see you guys there. Later.